Hum 121. It's Frida Week. I know you're as excited as I am to study the work of Frida Kahlo this week. I thought I'd just make a fun little uh, personal video about Frida, but also just to welcome you to the class again. We're a few weeks in now, so you've noticed that my assignments tend to be very consistent. You have an assignments for the week file at the top of your content tab for the week, and it draws your attention to all of the readings and the viewings for that week. Sometimes they're primary source material, sometimes it's films. As you noticed during the suffrage unit, we watched a lot of Ken Burns in the last couple weeks. I hope you really had a chance to watch those. They're phenomenal documentaries, and they give you more information in a short amount of time than you could find in many books. I'm a big book fan. I did my PhD work in women's studies, so I'm a big fan of giving students a lot to read and think about. But in a course that's only 13 weeks and an introductory course like this, I try to use as much documentary evidence and documentaries as possible, because I feel like sometimes film and documentaries and older film footage from earlier parts of the 20th century and on obviously into the 21st century can give you more information in a short amount of time. And hopefully that sparks your creativity and your curiosity to want to find out more. That's the whole point of the course. My mission is to facilitate your learning. You're the learner. You're the one that needs to go and find out all there is to know about women in the arts and culture. And later in the semester, for your final couple of projects, you'll really get to choose a woman or women from a different timeline, or different kinds of women from different backgrounds to really study, because I can't cover every single woman in the history of arts and culture in Western civilization in 13 weeks. So I give you the tools to be able to do it, so that we cover plenty of women from other backgrounds, women from other cultures, women of color, women, transgender women. You are going to have the opportunity to study anybody that you want to study later in the semester. I just highlight a few key people along the way in this first part of the semester to give you an idea of the range of people to look for and to try to study on your own. This week, Frida. I love Frida Kahlo. I have my little Frida Saint statue, and I have lots and lots and lots of, this will be backwards for you, but Frida Kahlo artwork. I can't say enough about her. I do hope you'll spend some time on that link to the Frida art website that has really a huge amount of her paintings. So you can really scroll in, you can zoom in, you can really look at the paintings and the stories that they tell. Obviously, she has a very complicated life. She had a major injury when she was young. She suffered serious bodily pain her whole life. She had a turbulent 2 marriages to Diego Rivera, who is another fabulous painter in his own right, but a complicated love interest, a love relationship that they indeed had. So if you make sure you watch the film, I think that Selma Hayek put her whole heart and soul into playing Frida and really researching Frida and giving so much background in that film that I feel like it's a rare. I love film versions of artists no matter what, but this one is particularly good. Has particularly relevant historical information, and it's fairly accurate as well. Frida puts her whole life and soul into her paintings. The pains that she went through in miscarriage, the pains that she went through in the hospital, in the Henry Ford Hospital. So I really want to draw your attention to diving deep into Frida's work and Frida's life. I have a facsimile of her diary. Her diaries were fascinating. If you're an art journaler or you know anything about art journaling, she is really the precursor to art journaling. Her diary, this is just a facsimile, obviously I don't have an original copy, is, a mix of art art, and then her notes when she was in the hospital, obviously. A big thing, you can't tell because it's backwards for you, but a thing about an entry on Diego in the 50s when they were still struggling in their marriage. I think that was the second time they were married. Frida is a fascinating artist. She's a fascinating woman. She's an important woman historically. It's why the women that I tend to choose, I try to choose women like Sojourner Truth a couple weeks ago, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Then we'll study the women in Hidden Figures because there's so much around these women. There's not just one story. Frida in particular is very tied to the politics of the time, to Trotsky, to communism. It was a very different time for communism. It was a time when many in the West, and certainly in North America and in South America, thought that that communism was going to actually help, really release people from the bondage that capitalism can cause for so many people, can cause a wealth gap. And people really thought communism, really sharing life and work and goods in common, was going to do so much for society. So when you see some of these early 20th century artists, my point being, when you see some of these early 20th century artists like Frida, or some of the other artists from that part of the century, Diego in particular as well, you really need to understand that communism and socialism in the early part of the 20th century, the way that it was being thought of and being birthed at the time, was very different. It was very much a hopeful sign that workers and people from different classes were going to be able to actually eke out a better living for themselves by creating a much more communal society, hence the term communism. It was about living a more communal, a more shared society. Those goals weren't reached. They weren't reached in the Soviet Union. They weren't really reached in Cuba, and certainly China has had its own issues with that. So it's evolved, it's changed. But what I want you to really think about is not to let some of those terms that come up in the film or some of the information about communism to sort of throw you off and think, oh my gosh, that was all evil. No, still not. And definitely worth your time investigating and looking at them for yourself, looking up those terms, looking up what were people in the artists in particular in the early 20th century, what were they trying to do? What were they trying to accomplish? And especially women artists at the turn of the century and into the really peak of the suffrage movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. All of this is happening during Frida's lifetime. And so that's another reason why I've put Frida where I have this week in the semester. I hope you enjoy her. I hope you really watch the film, enjoy it, watch the documentary that I posted on her. She is fascinating. I don't think there is a more important female artist, perhaps in the entirety of the 20th century, but certainly not in the first half of the century, who is more important or has left more of a legacy than Frida Kahlo. So really dig in and enjoy.